Next speaker is Andy Card. Andy lives in Ellicottville, New York, which is about 3.5 hours east of here. And then he also has operations in Louisiana. He's a family operation, and I met him several years ago when he hosted an EAS picnic on his farm, and I got to see him and his operation close up, and it's worth listening to. So, Andy Card.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me to come and share some beekeeping experiences with you guys. All right, we're going to tune it up a little bit more because I'm going to try to do what John did and do this without a mic because I don't have a ton of mic experience and have a tendency to move the mic too much when I get excited. So 1 minute I'm way too loud and the next minute you can't hear me. So I'm going to try to speak up. Is that good enough? Is that loud enough?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about honey production, and we do it in a couple of different places in the United States. How many of you consider yourselves to be from the Northeast? Raise the hands. Okay, quite a few. All right. So some of this is going to speak directly to you guys. What we do in Louisiana relates to pretty much to southern migratory beekeeping. In the course of my career, I've wintered bees, and we've wintered bees for 20 years in Florida, and we've been probably 30 now in Louisiana. We closed down the Florida operation in '98 when our manager retired down there. And we've also wintered some bees in Georgia and South Carolina as well. So got a few slides that we're gonna show you. One thing I noticed about John's talk here, just before mine, is I was amazed at how many similarities, without really knowing those guys well, how many similarities there are between his operation and the way we think about doing things and the way he has presented what he did. For example, we don't assemble any equipment either, really. We buy everything assembled because we want our people working bees. Very similar there. A couple other similarities. We had a broken leg incident on the last load out of California where one of our guys was adjusting a bobcat on a semi-trailer. Of course, the bobcat was going on the semi-trailer because it was the last load. We're taking the bobcat home, and he left it running, and then he proceeded to get off of it, and he caught his leg on the handle coming out, so the thing walked forward, fell forward. It was, most of these trailers nowadays don't have a quote-unquote headboard, so the thing rolled forward over the headboard. He tried to save it, stop it, got knocked off the trailer and broke his leg. Not as bad as John's, but he broke his leg. Another similarity as well. I have a picture on my cell phone that looks a lot like that trailer on that pile of dirt. And it was, again, the last load from Cape Cod. And I called up, it happened to, we have an in-house carrier that's got 15 or 20 trucks, and he works exclusively for us. And I called him up afterwards because we were exchanging cell phone pictures of this thing, and the owner of the truck said, "Well, it looks like Rocky missed a corner." Well, yeah, about 20 feet. And we had to hire a crane to pick that thing up and set it in position. Anyway, let's take a look at some of these slides here. Okay, this is kind of what we're doing. I have a little comment here. Merrimack Valley Apiary is the mother company of the two companies. We were in pollination. Is anybody here that consider themselves kind of a primarily pollinator type person? Okay, not too many. Anyway, we found from 1958, when my mom and dad started the farm, up until about the turn of the century, we were pretty much a pollination company. And we found that in the 15 years since 2000, we've evolved in a probably a situation where we're really more of a honey production company, and honey production dollars have exceeded pollination dollars slightly. We do a lot of pollination, as you can see. We do a lot of pollination in California. Probably half that number goes to California, and the other half goes to the Northeast, where we do multiple pollination in crops like New Jersey blueberries, New York apples, Mass and New Hampshire apples, Maine blueberries, Mass cranberries, and then we take that same group back here to the Western New York farm, try to eke out some honey production as well. But when we were pollinators, and I see this today, and I saw it years ago with my friend Horace Bell when I was in this position, when you're pollinating and the only stock you've got to draw on is your pollination stock, it's a lot more difficult. You know, you take what you're doing when you start out in the spring, you go to your first pollination, you're splitting your bees to get your numbers back, you're taking splits or split plus into that first pollination, building it on the pollination. Maybe by the time you get to the next one, you've got a full-blown hive. Just to give you an example, today, the way we operate today, bring bees back from California, we'll take 6,000 of them, 5,000 to New Jersey. We don't have to split them at all. You just take them straight in there. And trust me, there's a difference between what we're doing and the other guys that are doing what I had to do, which is struggle along, split their bees, and so on. So what this is saying is being a honey production company and having what that does, what does that mean? That means we keep 20,000 hives in Louisiana year round, basically. Some of them go to California, but we have that stock to fall back on while we take the 6,000 around through the Northeastern pollination circuit, which is still to this day kind of rough on that particular group. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about honey production. And many of you probably know who Jim Powers is or was. He was a great guy and a very successful beekeeper back in the day. This is very true, okay? And locations, it's all about in order to be successful in honey production, the first thing you got to do to be successful in honey production is find plants that are going to produce a surplus. That seems simple, but it's not as simple as it looks, because I've been through it. I've had to, in Louisiana, especially New York State, you can move bees to different spots and get zero or just not get any production. So this is really true. Let me go to the next slide here. These are some pictures. This is South Louisiana. Typically we run 96 hives to the yard. Here's another shot. These are proven bee yards. You can see the way they're supered. The average down there is not that high, probably about 80 pounds. The 30-year average down there is about 80 pounds. This is a shot in New York State, and this, you can't see it, but those bees are sitting in a field of spotted knapweed. We'll talk a little bit about spotted knapweed in a minute here. So I'm going to go down here. Okay, here's some honey. These are kind of honey-producing plants. Now, there's two kind of things you have to do. This is the production side, but you also need to figure out the build-up side. Where are you going to put the bees to build up? And you do it by testing. That's the only way you can figure it out. That's the only way we figured it out. Because when we went to our Eastern New York farm over near Herkimer, New York, no one ever told us no one told us anything about where to go. We just had to go and see what happened. So, I don't know, we probably took 2-3 trailer loads out there back in, I'm going to say 85, it was later than that, 88 I think we started out there. We took 2-3 trailer loads of bees out there, and I think we made honey. Out of 21 yards, we made honey in 3. The other 18 yards missed, okay? We had, which is why you got to do that. And even if you don't have semi-loads of bees and you just got a few hives, it's interesting. I'm reading a book about Roxanne Quimby, Bert's bees. Well, Bert had 26 hives when he met Roxanne. And he had 26 hives in 26 locations. So in Maine, in northern Maine. So it's kind of interesting. It just goes to show that you got to experiment with this to figure it out. Now these southern floral sources, I've got orange blossom up there, Florida, okay, Gallberry's Florida, there's Tai's Georgia, saw palmetto's Florida. I don't have to point my hand, I can use this thing. This is what we make them. These two here are Louisiana honeys, and we're down here in Florida again. And then over here for you folks that keep bees in the Northeast, you're probably familiar with most of these, or you should be. The white and yellow sweet clover for us here in New York State is not a major producer. It's volunteer. It helps out, but there's a couple of major producers right here in New York State. Spotted knapweed, Japanese knotweed, and of course goldenrod and aster, if you're on the right soil. If you have the right soil, that's how that works. The basswood and tulip poplar, those are trees you need to find, look for them if they're around. And then of course, that's the production side. You also need to have the build-up side figured out as well. You need to know where your willow is, where your maple is. You know, dandelions are pretty easy in the Northeast, that sort of thing. But if you're doing beekeeping, you've got to be in a place where you can pretty much depend on making a commercial amount of honey in that spot. It's really, really critical. Okay, now we're going to just flash through some pictures. This is tulip poplar. That's a tulip poplar blossom right there. This is basswood over here on the left. Usually those blossoms are so high up in the tree you can't see them. But those are two production trees that, and I find with most of the tree honey locust being another one, most of the tree honey is not really consistent enough to be commercially, a commercial thing that it's nice to have, but that's not what we really look for. It's nice to have it on the side, but we're looking for things like spotted knapweed being the enemy of, it's considered highly invasive, but it's probably one of the better honey producing plants in North America, really. And it runs all the way across through Michigan, Minnesota, and into the Dakotas and Montana as well, in varying amounts, depending again on the soil types. You all familiar with this. Goldenrod's interesting. Goldenrod is pretty much east of the Mississippi, but it doesn't produce a surplus in a lot of places, even though it's there, and that including New York State. That's very dependent on soil type, which we're going to talk a little bit about that here. Soil pH is, well, it's something that we look at when we try to figure out where we're going to put bees, or back in the day, and we've kind of got it figured out at this point. But these are some things that we looked at. Merrimack Valley Apiaries, the original farm. We started in Massachusetts, of all places, and east of the Appalachians. And there was never enough production over there. That's kind of why we ended up as a pollination company, why Mom and Dad stayed out there and did pollination instead of honey production, probably because the soil conditions, not to say you can't make honey on the East Coast, but it is more difficult than other places. When you get on the other side of the Appalachians, especially up in the Northeast, New York State, Michigan, Minnesota, across there, things get a little bit easier to produce a commercial amount of honey. Here, let me show you this. Okay, here's a map of New York State, of course, and if you look here, let's try this. See this green right here? This green part? That's the acid, that's the non-acid, that's the sweet soil. That's the lime, that's high lime soil. And if you were to place a map of the bee yards in New York State, they pretty much follow that green. You know, if you see up here, right here, and right across here, pretty much follow that. Now we're located on the goldenrod side of things. We're located over here in Otto, which is 8 miles north of Ellicottville. The farm is right here. That's a goldenrod farm. Okay, that's not for summer honey production. We make a little bit of honey there in the summer, but that's mainly goldenrod. And the reason we're there, again, it's a soil reason. We're there because that goldenrod on that heavy soil is what you need for goldenrod production. Okay. These hives are back from probably New Jersey, but anyway, talking about stocking yards, it really, if honey conditions are correct, a lot of times it doesn't really matter how many hives you put in a yard. This is the home, those buildings in the back are our extraction and storage buildings, and trees are growing up there. We need to cut them down, but that's another. Anyway, we've had as many as 500 colonies during the goldenrod flow, made a 55-pound average with them. Not this particular group, these got moved out. We just did this, it's just a picture of what it might look like. But we made a 55-pound average, which is 37,000 pounds of honey we made in one bee yard. Now the way we figure our bee yard thing out is if we've got 24-foot truck and we can put 144 hives on it, loaded, we cut that in half, and so our yards we put 72 hives in a typical yard, and that works just fine. And it covers 2 yards. It's the right number.
So was that in New York?
That's New York.
And was it acidic soil for goldenrod?
Yeah, it's more acidic. It's actually, in Cat County, it's actually neutral. People are always accusing us of it being acidic, but pretty much if it's acidic, it's just slightly acidic, and a lot of times it's neutral in that county.
That's good for goldenrod.
It's heavy. Yeah, heavy clay soils are what's good for. The heavier the soil, the better the yield on goldenrod is how that works. Okay, now Edward Lloyd Sechrist. If you're gonna take anything away from Andy's talk today, write this guy's name down, and go online, look him up. He wrote 2 little books back in the 1940s. One is called Scientific Beekeeping, and the other one is called Honey Getting. I suggest you go to I think Honey Getting. I'm pretty sure Honey Getting is online. You can just, because it's out of print, of course, way out of print. Read that little book, and you'll get, if you get anything from bothering to come all the way over here and listen to me, if you read that little book, I've got a little synopsis of what he's talking about here. But he was a bee genius, this guy. He was a regular contributor to the American Bee Journal as well during the 30s and 40s. Anyway, what he's talking about here is a clear brood nest. We're going to show you a little bit about that. All these things right here. Of course, he's got this here. I don't know if we've eradicated AFB, but this kind of dates his program here, because AFB back in the 40s was a big deal. They didn't have mites. They didn't have hardly any of the stuff that we have, but they had AFB. But swarm control, we're going to talk a little bit about swarm control and some things. Here, let me show you the next slide. Okay. What we're looking for is we want the top of the brood nest just above the honey supers. The ideal condition is to have this brood nest be right there, okay? Right where that frame is. You want that brood all the way to that top bar if you can get it. And then your first honey super, which is all honey, goes right on top of that, okay?
Are you using excluders?
No, we don't use excluders. No excluders. So sometimes the queen will walk up, and she will walk up. We're going to talk about that about what we found out about that. Here's another. These are Louisiana shots. I had the guys shake the bees off. This one's a different frame and a different time. These are both good examples of where you want to keep that brood nest oriented. Now, let's move again. There's three ways to keep bees. We got the double brood nest, which is a good idea for keep anybody that's wintering bees in the Northeast. That you winter over and you don't migrate. Double brood nest probably the way to do it. Single brood nest is more of a southern thing, and then the single brood nest over the medium. Now we've been doing it, after all the years I've kept bees, we changed up a little bit. Let me see, I'm going to jump ahead a slide here. This here, you see this deep in the middle, and this is a typical pollination pallet right here, banded so the bees can't fall off the skid, so we can go fast with them. But here's what we figured out has happened. We were having, year after year, we've been having trouble. If the bees got heavy in New Jersey and we sent them to Maine, we got a lot of swarming. We had a lot of swarming issues. And we finally figured out, I changed the configuration this year to look like this, okay? Well, because what was happening is the brood nest, because we don't run excluders, brood nest was running up in here like this. Well, what we were doing right between these two mediums, we were giving the bees a perfect chance to build swarm cells. And when we did this, the brood nest kind of stays right here much better. Honey goes up here, much better. We had a lot less swarming, which is really a big deal. Because we were losing hundreds of swarms. If we had a swarming issue, if you're keeping bees on a pallet and one swarm, you're probably going to have 4 or 5 of them swarm. Same deal. I mean, it's like a smell. There's a bunch of bees in the air here, mainly because they're harvesting some honey there, I think. But anyway, let's go back one slide. This is a double brood nest configuration. This is what a single looks like. You can see we're feeding them a 2-gallon pail. We're going to talk about feeding here in a little bit as well. Hopefully here. Let's go down here. Okay. Now, as a farm, we pay a lot of attention to this one right here, these nosema deals. And I guess that's where the biggest difference, between us and, there are commercial guys that don't pay any attention to nosema. We check our nosema levels all the time, and that's why we know, one of the things we found out from doing this is that the bees that go to pollination, and we feel that this is pretty much from fungicide applications, but the nosema spore counts skyrocket when they've been exposed to fungicides. That's what we're thinking, because we've got 20, you gotta remember, we got 20,000 hives in Louisiana. We can compare the numbers to bees that are experiencing this versus bees that are not experiencing this, okay? So, some things that are handy to know here. I put down some, how to sample them. We have our own lab on the farm where we do our own checking for varroa and nosema, because we can't wait for Dennis to get back to us even the 2 weeks. We need to stay ahead and monitor our own stuff. One of the things we do here is we do fumigation. We do fumigation to control this stuff. We feed fumigillin probably twice a year, once to twice a year, again, depending on the levels. The bees that go to the Northeast that are running 8 to 10 million, they're probably going to get 2 applications. Whereas the Louisiana outfit, maybe 1. But all of these things, this is all standard stuff that I've got up here. I put up here. You can go online. They'll explain all this.
Your last entry there says the fumigation of comb. What are you doing there? Are you rotating comb out?
The fumigation with phostoxin, what we do is we put them the supers in either a container. The best way to do is to use a container. We have got a couple of buildings set up.
Just the supers, not the deeps.
Exactly. We do the supers. We do as many deeps as die, because
It's stored comb is what you're doing.
exactly, it's stored comb. And the problem is, and he mentioned it, the problem is that as long as that deep is alive in the outfit, in the field, we're not fumigating it. So it's a constant source of infection. That's we can only do them when they die, unless you want to kill off the whole outfit and take it in. That's really not practical solution to this. So we do what we can with the phostoxin, and we figured out if you don't fumigate wet comb, wet supers, that's the fastest way to get to kick off an infestation of nosema. And the reason is that that little bit of honey on there keeps all those spores soft. In other words, we found out that if you put if you don't fumigate and you put wet supers, and a lot of you in a sense, you've got to understand what's happening here, because it could happen to you even if you only got 25 hives. If those supers are wet, those spores are soft, and the infection is just that much quicker. And we tested this, we know this for a fact. We put these wet supers on and gone back and checked how fast the nosema counts explode, and they really explode fast. And I know this is a logical progression of, see, I remember, I hate to admit this, but I'm old enough to remember, we did, back when I was growing up with Dad, we had an ethylene oxide chamber for American foul brood. And in order to penetrate, we finally figured out how to make that chamber work. And the way we made it work was we added basically soaked burlap on top of each pallet. We had this chamber would take like 4 little pallets. This is back in the day when a couple thousand hives was it, and we were fighting American foul brood tooth and nail when I was like in high school. And we would stack 16 supers on a little pallet on a roller and roll it in. But what we would do is we would soak these burlaps as hard as we could get them to soak, and then we would roll them in there, and then we take the rest of the water and throw the rest of the water in and shut the door. It was a plywood kind of thing, and it's crazy. We're probably lucky we didn't kill ourselves, but we just put this plywood door on there and preheated it for a little while, and then we'd put the ethylene oxide in there until the plywood started to bulge a little bit, so we'd build a little bit of pressure. We were able to kill American foul. We were able to kill American foul brood that way. Okay, so it makes sense that wet comb would do the same thing with these nosema spores, which are what we're fighting today. I mean, American foul brood today is the least of our issues. So, okay, now we'll talk a little bit about feeding. In our world, we usually, if we're not making honey, if we're not making a honey crop, we're usually feeding them. Uh-oh. How did that happen? It hit escape? Okay. But now I got to go all the way down through it here. It's cool. We'll just go back, right? Come on.